I want to thank the audience because it is so great that we are together and I'm not on a screen in front of you, though this is going to be recorded and it will appear on a screen later. But it's just so nice to be able to share a stage with you, literally in person, and to have a live audience. So thank you. And I also want to just share and recognize the Contemporary Austin, which is the museum that originally organized Deborah's exhibition, Deborah Roberts I'm, and it has traveled to MCA Denver where it currently lives, and we are so proud to be able to present it. But it is the great work of the team in Austin that allowed us to bring it here. It's so great to be with you, and we have some images that that's the wrong direction. Okay. So what we hope to do tonight is be in conversation. Deborah's incredible work will be behind us, so if anything that we're saying is not related to what you see behind you, it's only because I have to crane my neck a little bit, and so I might be off track a little. But we start out tonight with a couple of images that are from about 10 years ago. And, you know, the direction that you are currently working in seems to be anchored and rooted in these earlier works. And that really kind of came out from your experience in part in graduate school and shortly after. But I'm wondering if we could actually start by talking about what you were doing before you attended graduate school, and if you could speak to the experience that drove you to go to graduate school.
Right.
Exactly.
So I don't know if you guys knew my work before, but I was a full-time painter. And I was doing work that was very similar to Norman Rockwell. I was talking about the Black experience and how it relates to living in America. And it was great work. I had really wonderful clients. And I noticed that a magazine had asked me to do a cover. And I did a very abstract cover, and it wasn't anything that they wanted. They wanted a little girl running through the flowers. And I noticed that my work had started to change. And I was like, what's happening, And I've always been very earnest about my practice. So when the work started to change, I said, well, I'm going to give it a summer. I'm going to take some time off and just work to just work. And the more it became very hard, very difficult. My ideas were in my head, but I couldn't make them come out. And I had friends say, well, why do you want to even change? You're selling work. That's what artists want. You're being recognized for that. And it was more. I wasn't in the dialogue that other artists were having that I felt that I needed to have. So I just started reading more Cornel West and Bell Hooks. And the more I read, the more scholarship I was getting, the more the works changed even more. And I realized I had to go to grad school to really figure it out. And so I packed up my bags and moved to San Francisco.
Did you feel that it was a really brave move at the time?
No, I was running from the economy. I didn't have any money, so I was running into school. So it was. I don't think it was like being brave. I think artists do what they have to do. It's nothing new. I just did what the art told me I needed to do. So and I've always done that. So, yeah.
And at what point for you did the painting kind of shift to something, a work like this to me feels very much like the seeds of what we see you're making today. So can you talk to us a little bit about that shift?
Well, I always had talked about beauty and the idea of beauty in my work before. And so this Miseducation of Mimi was the idea of showing that what is royalty, what is beauty. So my session with the Queen was in this picture. So I did a little girl's face, and then I put the Queen behind her, a young picture of Queen Elizabeth, and then she has blonde hair. So this notion of blonde hair, blue eye, royalty exists, but what if you don't look like that? What does your beauty look like? Does it look like that that scribble to people, that unrecognizable person. And so those were the things I was working through in the work. And these early works were helping me build that process up and what the work needed.
Do you see this work as a step almost to where you would go?
Yeah. And I always tell people, these were I was in Syracuse, as we talked about earlier, and I had a studio visit. And anyone that's in grad school, they know how professors are. And he came in, and I had 20 works, as I always do. And he says, well, once you do 50 works, why you just do 20? And I guess he thought he was challenging me. Well, I was a grown woman, so you can't challenge me. So I said, well, why don't I do 200? He said, well, why don't you? I said, I might do 250. And I did 210 works of miseducational miming. And each time it grew the work, my ideas became clearer, and my, the language of the work was just starting to come through. And while I was, I guess being smart, what he actually did was push me into the direction I needed to go. And so the work developed very easily from there.
Did you have, that's a really special kind of moment, the kind of catalyst for your process. Did you have other experiences as an exercise in a class or that when you were in art school that did help kind of, reorient your practice at all? Or was it mostly just kind of from within?
Well, there's an artist named Michael Ray Charles, and he told me once I got to grad school not to go down this rabbit hole with professors. So I didn't. I was like, I had that armor on me. And I was doing really well until I took one of those classes. I can't remember what they were called, but they're in between the semesters.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, you have to, you get a whole semester worth of work.
It's like an intensive or something.
Yeah, an intensive. Yeah, so we did an intensive. And I had a crazy teacher named Holly Greenberg, and that was what I thought grad school was. She drove, that 1 week, it felt like a year. She drove us insane. We had to make paper. It was too much. And then she wanted us to go sit in the graveyard and think about our practice. And I refused to do that one. I was like, I am not going in no damn graveyard thinking about my practice, because somebody might start talking to me and I don't, So it was so great because it just refocused I love rigor. I do. It makes me sick. Physically sick, but it makes my work better. And so that was the experience. I think that it was right before I graduated in 2014, and the work just started to take flight.
This is another work. I love this because it feels to me, it's almost like a coda to your work. It has all these different components of what you will kind of build upon and build out and where you were working prior. And so it feels like it's this kind of pivot moment. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but
no. This is really great because this was my thesis show work. And this was the first time I started adding material to my work. I did the Big Debbie. I love drawing, and I used a pastel Crayola and then I used this transfer to put another face on top of that. That was really the first really act of collaging that I was doing with the work. So I was doing the little small ones, but not collage in the way that you see today. This was the first one.
But it seems like it's the root from which so much of your work kind of grew. And what's the material that's...
It's burlap. And what I did was I just tore it all apart, and then I sewed it back around the neck. We actually just unearthed this work, and we're putting it's going to be in Art Basel this December, but it's 8 foot. It's a big, huge work, and I don't do that big anymore.
It's remarkable. Just to encounter that face at that scale is so I know, it's pretty magnificent. Okay, I'll keep going. So then not too shortly after, we get to what I'll refer to as a kind of, I don't want to say classic Deborah Roberts approach, but it does seem to reflect a lot of the kind of key ideas and approaches to your art making, both in terms of content as well as in terms of the collage. So I wonder if you could even maybe take us through a little bit of how you approach making a work, your process, the importance of collage. Do you work on one thing at a time? Do you work across different pieces at once?
Right now, we're working on several pieces, and I really don't really like doing that. I think right now we have a total of 9 works going on in the studio. I don't like doing that because I don't think you really have time to live with a work and let the work really bloom when you're doing things like that. But what happens with me is that work flows out. And sometimes when I did work like this, I can't control it, and I end up doing a lot of work because I call it being in my zone, and it's just it flows out, and I don't know where that comes from. These works were part of that zone in 2017, where the works just started to just pour out, and so if you look at my work, there is a 4-prong approach. Okay, so I have art history, American history, black culture, and pop culture. Those are the key ingredients to my work. You're going to see that in a lot of my, and almost all my works. At least one of those things, at least all 3 or all 4 of them. And in this piece in particular, Still We Rise, I have Muhammad Ali's hands in there. I have Michelle Obama. I have Gloria Steinem's hands in there, and they're making her dreadlocks. This is all coming from her. This is the history that has come from being a young woman, that the strength of Muhammad Ali to stand up and say, I'm not going to fight. Michelle Obama, Still We Rise, and all those things. And then she's looking up, but yet the eye is directly toward the viewer. And then her hand, and then the clothes, and then this idea of the zebra socks, as if, it's a herd, that there's so many, she's part of a tribe that has come before her. All those little tropes in the work is hopefully leading the viewer to a more understanding of my practice.
How do you kind of manage or balance those 4 key kind of topics, themes, generative ideas that you explore in all of your work, and that you frankly really have always, not just in these more recent ones or the collage work, but how do you, how intentional, how conscious are you about balancing all those different influences? And do you ever want to go really explicit and then have to pull yourself back? Because some of it is really subtle.
Right, a lot of it's very subtle because I think before my work was in your face and it was a turnoff. If I think in a way, if you tell somebody, you're destroying me, you destroyed my family, and I hate you, then there's no room for dialogue after that. And if you approach everybody with a closed hand, there's no room for friendship and love or anything else to be received in that. So when I listen to, it's so funny, everybody. I call Cornel West pre-Obama and post-Obama. So I read pre-Obama Cornel West, which he is so amazing. And so the way he talks about in The Reader about the black body and the black sexuality and what that means and why people are drawn to that, I place that stuff in my work. It's very important that I put pop culture in the work because I want the work to be now in this time. But when I was doing a lot of celebrity faces, I got to the point where people were looking for that. They were looking for Rihanna, Misty Copeland, Michelle Obama. They were just looking for those things. Now, James Baldwin, I'm 110,000% in love with his writing, his ideas, because it's like he's writing for us right now. He's here, he's present, and everything that is happening. So you're going to see a lot of that in my work, and it's just, I can't break it. I mean, every time I say, don't put that eye, don't put those hands, and boom, I'm gluing the hands, I'm gluing the eyes in. And it's because it's so important when you read all the things he talked about, and just, it's so very important in my practice.
Absolutely. Well, and I think some of the works that are in view in the museum right now do have, details of Baldwin, of Obama, and other famous people. And knowing that they are referenced certainly enhances it, but I mean, I will say you don't need to know it to be blown away by it or impacted by it, but I think your point is in terms of anchoring and connecting and almost concretizing that these figures are not ideals, they're not so abstract. They are based on real people, and in that way, they become even more real themselves.
Right. And it's also a way of honoring them. I mean, not that they need me to honor them, but their presence. And we talked about this before about being beneficiaries of people who come before us.
Yes.
You know, they've laid the groundwork and to path that I am walking now. And I'm hoping that I'm creating new pathways for other artists to walk in.
Absolutely, but not copying.
Not copying. Oh, let's not talk. Don't get me started on copying. You know, you got to put a bag on my head when we start talking about copying.
Well, it's interesting to think about it because collage itself is a medium that, you know, was born in kind of the early 20th century and has been interrogated by a lot of different artists. And when you took it on as your kind of way forward creatively, you were taking on that legacy as well. How conscious or self-conscious maybe were you of that?
Well, I mean, I knew about Romeo Bearden. I knew about Kirk Switter, but I didn't know about Hannah Hawk until I did some research. I knew that Romeo Bearden, he did more urban scenes, more jazz scenes. He was making statements based on, you know, what was happening in America right now at that time. And then musically and what was happening in Harlem and during the Renaissance. So my approach to adding to what Bearden was doing was to talk about what it was like to be a Black woman. What happens when you start off at 8 years old trying to figure out who you are and how you fit into society. And that's when it starts. Sometimes it starts a little bit earlier, but for me, that's when it started. So I did based on my history. And so it was really important to talk about those things and take what I've learned from Bearden and use a little bit of that and move into things became mine. You know, at that time, no one was doing collages this large. Collages are normally this small. I think the largest one that Bearden did is at MoMA, and I think it's 48 by 60. That's the largest collage that's ever been done before I started doing them this big. Now everybody's doing them anyway, whatever. and also talking about white space.
Yeah.
Talking about putting a Black body into white space solely on its own power and having the audience and the viewer come up and engage in that body alone. I didn't cloak it with sound or imagery or flowers or anything. You have to talk to this person.
Yes.
And only this person.
Yes. And here's a great example of that. It's a great segue to talk about that dynamic between the large white space and the figure. And to me, I think the power of your work is really that the figure is there and the white space has to move around it. You know, sometimes people assume it's a blank white canvas and then you put the figure on. But no, the figure is there and the white is
around it.
Exactly. And what that white symbolizes as well has to negotiate that, has to reckon with that, has to adapt to that. Does that capture kind of how you think of, because the power of all of that space, yet it is so diminished by the power of the person that you've defined.
Well, the whole idea is that so many times we are seen through the gaze of whiteness that, you know, we have to assimilate into whiteness. And as individuals, we can't exist without whiteness. But what I'm trying to say that we exist with whiteness. And sometimes we overpower the whiteness. And that's what some of the works do. I mean, not all of them. I would like all of them to do that. Everything is not a success. But what I'm trying to do in this picture in particular, that's not ladylike, is to say, who decides what is ladylike? And is it something from Madison Avenue? Is it something that fashion dictates? Is it something that video dictate? Is rap music dictates that things? So what is ladylike, and who defines that? So for me, all the little symbols in this work, the Hello Kitty, the little, the little sexual type things that are in the work, if you really unplug it, the little, little cherries on the panties, the little red toenails. I mean, it was no way before I was 22 could I put red polish on my toenails. Are you kidding? My mom would have had a fit. So it was either white or nothing. I mean, maybe pink when you're 15, but nothing. So that whole idea of who decides who you are and how you're supposed to enter life is always at the forefront of these works. So, and sometimes that's not dictated through blackness. It is dictated through whiteness. And so that's why the white space is so important. And I move my imagery around that white space. So sometimes you can see a lot of the works are moved to this side. Some are centered in whiteness, some are centered off whiteness. So the idea is that when the works are all put together, that is a chorus, there is a rhythm to the works. And that's what I try to do in the practice.
Well, I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
And I think when I'm in the gallery, the large works gallery at our museum, which has it's the largest gallery, and it has all these different paintings in the, you feel like you're in an audience of youthful, courageous, yet vulnerable people. That you've created a scene kind of, that they're all interacting with one another. They're not contained within their frame. And I think also the way you use the frame as a boundary that can be breached, where there may be other example. Oh, we'll get to that one in a second. But just the way that some of your figures seem to be pushing against as an assertion of their power and strength is such a it's such a kind of visceral and without the right word, but in any case, it's kind of an electric moment where it feels like they come to life in a whole new way.
Well, one of the things that I try to do in my practice is that I want you to see that these are children. These are vulnerable children who may act up and be loud and silly and whatever, but they're children nevertheless. And so having them move off the page, like in the looking glass, where the kid's body is curved off the page and he's doing some little ridiculous little gesture, or even the little boy who is cock-a-doodle-doo, and he reminds me of my brother with them little skinny legs, and he's gesturing this cognitive, I'm so powerful, but his legs are this little, and he could do anything, and he's claiming his independence. And so, but yet he's still a child, and you have to see him that way. So
I think I would love to talk about this series of works of Black figures against a Black background. And I think this is a somewhat new direction for you, but let's talk, if you will, or really, I'll let you do it. But what is it, what was the catalyst for that switch, and where do you see this kind of series headed?
Right. I had given a prompt to one of my studio assistants to go out, and I was looking on social media, and I noticed on Facebook that every day, almost every week, someone was missing. And we never knew the outcome of that. And I told her, I said, why don't you go and do, let's say 2015 to today, and see how many names we can come up with missing Black women. And she came back with 400. And I was like, are you kidding me? Why this isn't national news? Why we're not talking about this? And I just couldn't believe it. And so one of the things I call my waking time is at 3 a.m. That is when I am the most honest with myself about anything, whatever it is in my life that I need to face up to. And these works and this idea of all these women missing and no one caring, what could I possibly do? I didn't want to move away to white space because there's still dialogue to have there. But what I wanted to do was also talk about being present and absent at the same time, existing and not existing. How could I do that? And I looked up. I was in a very dark room because I can't sleep with light. And it was just dark, and I existed in that darkness. I was alive. I was waiting to be found, and I said, I had to do black paintings. And so I got in the studio. We started painting the canvases black. They wasn't very large because I didn't know what the series was going to look like. And I kicked the girls out on Friday. I have Friday
Your studio assistants.
my studio assistants. Friday through Saturday, through Monday is my days in the studio, and I put on Toni Morrison, Song of Solomon, and if you ever heard her talk, she just tells the truth. And I was listening to that whole thing about Milkman and the whole chapter, and I just started working on those. I drew the outline first. I never do that. I do the face, but I drew the outline of her. I wanted her to be powerful. I wanted her to stand erect, and I wanted her to need help without asking. And that picture came up. And later I put on the face. The face was last. I put on the white buttons because those were beacons. Those were beacons for help. And it just outlined it in green, and that was it. So the next one, I said, well, what if she's not alone? And I did a second one with two girls holding each other with the red flowers, the many who have come before and after. And then I put them on with stockings. And then I took a green pencil and I outlined it because the chalk of them, somehow this is currency for someone. Someone is taking these people, so it is money. I could have used any color, but I used green. And then I painted their nails gold, which I do all the time, that talks about currency and commodity of black bodies. And it just became really deep. I thought about these works a lot. And, I'm pretty happy-go-lucky till I'm driving, I'm a maniac. But so it was changing the way I was feeling in my studio practice. And I kind of didn't like that because I'm not one of those people who like to go to dark places. I think you can't come out of them. And I don't want to get caught into that. I know I can get myself out of anything mentally if I had to. But it was so distressing. I didn't know what happened to these people. And I was drawing them and thinking about them in a way that they did not exist, that they were loved. They had sisters, they had brothers, they had parents who missed them. And no one cared enough to even talk about it. And so after I did the fourth one, I did one more. And I said, I'm not going to touch these again. And I thought I wasn't. But there's more work to do in this work. And I have to take it on. And I'm going to take it on in February, I think. Well, we're starting right now to do the black gesso and to get them ready, prepped. But I have to be in a space where I can take on this emotion. I'm going to do 6 of them. They're going to all be in a row.
6 more?
One big, 6 big, huge. And hopefully whatever that needs to be said, gets said through that. Mm-hmm. And then I don't have to touch it again.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that, many people obviously think about and reflect on with your work is that you highlight, you center children of color. And up until 2020, it was mostly girls. But now you are addressing both boys and girls. So I'm going to read a quote that Nicole Smith Johnson wrote about your collages, that they are striking reflections on Black innocence and the ways that society writes meaning onto Black bodies before the people occupying those bodies have had a chance to define themselves. And she pretty much nailed it, I would say. So there was no need for me to try to reword that. But that idea of presenting figures before they have been even had the chance to exercise agency, independence,
Right.
freedom of thought
Right.
or action.
Right.
And yet what is projected onto them, I mean, this is maybe a more explicit example of that, but can you talk a little bit about how you
Right.
approach addressing that?
Right. So many black women and parents have to talk to their children after they go into kindergarten, first grade. They're just little kids, and if they act up or have a tantrum, they're not looked at as, oh, he's having an issue today. Maybe he didn't get enough sleep. Maybe he's, whatever. And it's this idea of an aggression that's put on them. They're criminalized very early. They get write-ups. They get expelled more than any other group of children. And they're just kids trying to figure out who they are. They're babies. And already in third grade, you're already as looked upon as being a disruptive person. Maybe you learn differently. Maybe there are a lot of things, a lot of leeway that you give other kids that you don't give black kids. And automatically, so this was really partly based on the story in Chicago with the 10-year-old little boy who was playing kickball with his friends. And the police got a call that someone was breaking windows. And so he was running to the first base. And when they drove up and he was running, they assumed that he was the person, but it was an 18-year-old, but he was 10. So they took him, and he was so little, and they handcuffed him behind his back, and they pushed him against a car, and everyone was around him. He's playing ball, blah, blah, blah. They said, we have to figure it out. The little kid was so scared he wet his pants right there. He just wet his pants. And soon they found the guy who did it. He was 18 years old, a big old kid. And then they let him go, but he was humiliated. It was videotaped. I mean, they changed who he is the course of his life, whether it's going to be good or bad. He's always, his pain, his victimization is going to be there for us to take from it all this time. So I wanted to do these kids, of these boys. I did different ages, and I really, this guy on this side, I really abstract his face. He's looking up, he's looking down. He's looking directly at you. His eye is centered on the viewer. This kid is looking away. Instead of you think of him as a criminal, I put Patrick, a cartoon hat on his head. I put Pokemon, I think that's Pokemon. I don't know. Pikachu, I don't know, some little dumb cartoon. And I wanted to say, look at that first. See that before you criminalize this person. And so the suits are really big. The prison uniforms are big. They're striped. They're striking. And one kid is looking away. And then I put multiple faces in the end. Because we have to look at these kids not as criminals, not as doing something wrong, but as children at play. Right?
Amen.
Yeah.
I think also acknowledge what the work also does is it, for many viewers, it questions that, it forces you to question, like, was that what I had assumed? Was that what I had thought? And did I come to this with that assumption? And you start to, hopefully, they start to undo that as a result of the encounter. This is one of my favorites, I have to say.
Mine too. I should have kept this work. I really should. Kevin knows I should have kept it. I definitely should have kept this work. When I did it, I knew I should have kept it because that's me.
I think one of the things that personally just that I connect with this work is the humanity of her pose, how real. I can return to my 9-year-old self making that very same gesture, that wanting to be proud and confident yet feeling insecure. The way that she looks out and it's not, I don't want to say the word confront, the way that she dares you to look at her and to feel what she's feeling is so powerful. And I think about so many of the figures that you create is endowing them certainly with that dignity and confidence, yet also vulnerability. Now, I'm not saying things that anyone who's spoken about your work hasn't said before, but the polarity between, that tension between confidence and insecurity, or strength and vulnerability, heroic and fearful. I mean, there are many. You kind of capture all of it in one. To me, that seems to almost make her larger than life. That she is not just her; she's many.
Right. I tell people that's me. When I was 9 years old, that was my body before these came. And I, I did not have, I had a weird shape. I didn't know who I was. And I was embarrassed and proud and you're right, vulnerable, and the idea of becoming whatever I was becoming at that time. And I remember that. I look at that and I say, oh my God, that was me. And the stomach, the draw, that's when I was even doing drawing the stomach, and I was saying, my mom said I always came out with a big belly. And so I love that whole idea, and the legs. And not all little girls are perfectly thin. We have to talk about weight in our communities and what that means if it starts early. So those type of conversations I'm having in the work right now. This is the first work that I did like that we need to have those type of conversations. And it's just everything about this I love. And it should be in my storage room right now.
It should be at a museum where everyone
it's
can
at
come
the
and
ICA
enjoy
Boston.
it. Okay, well, there are worse places it could be.
Right, yeah.
So with the work like this, The Duty of Disobedience, which is on view in the museum right now, what I'd love to, I think it's a great example of the kind of coding, explicit coding that you layer into your work. So maybe it's a kind of jumping off point where we can talk about how you embed codes or symbols in your work to add an additional kind of layer of meaning.
So everyone talks about protesting. Protesting is the voice of the unheard. You have to protest in order to get your point across, to change things. It is our constitutional right. When Black people tend to protest, the media seems to be focused on what happens after dark, whether when people start to loot, people start taking advantage of the looting, bad actors come in. Not everybody who is looting even down for the cause. These are the people who are just there doing that. But all during the day, there's a lot of peaceful protesting, singing, dancing. We don't hear about that. They're waiting for that one thing to happen. It always happens after dark. So after George Floyd was murdered, I did this work because I thought, justice is blind, that the way people view protesting was really negative. So I did the little girl who is peacefully protesting with her hand up very quietly, but I put 3 monkeys, and I don't like monkeys. I did 3 monkeys running across her chest with a red balloon. That is the prize. And that is what people see when they sometimes look at this work. And we are not animals. We are people who have been oppressed for a long time and need a change. Sometimes that frustration builds up until you explode, and it may be exploding in throwing rocks or setting things on fire or screaming. And that does not make you an animal, that makes you human. And so I did that in that work, and then I did the pop, pop, pop. Pop goes to weasel. So when I was little, because I use children as my protagonists, there are certain things I cannot do. I cannot use guns. I do not use guns. I can't. There are certain things I just won't do in my practice. But there's ways of talking about violence in the work. So I have this big weasel, which is the police officer chasing this little monkey who is running for his life. And whatever that means to you, it's up to you to interpret that. And then I have the little girl who is holding a lollipop, a Tootsie Roll Pop, and Pop is considered gunfire. And it is cloaked in all those patterns and colors because this has happened before over and over and over and over again. And then I have the face without any eyes because we know nothing's really changing. It's not going to change.
Gonna let that.
It's the truth. We have to accept it. It's not 3 a.m, but we have to accept it. It's not going to change.
Why do you center children? Why is that important to you?
Because they're the hope. That's the hope. And if we don't let them grow up to be their true selves, if we throw these roadblocks into saying that black girls are very sexual, they're very loud, they cannot be taught, they cannot be loved the way other kids are. If we change who they are, they can't grow up to their full potential. There's no way. There's no way you can change little boys and little girls if you tell them they're useless. You just can't grow from that. So I'm trying to, in my practice, to say is that they're not that. And this is the way they are being portrayed, and we have to change that. So that's the core of the work, really, you know.
One thing, again, I'm going to read a quote to you.
Okay.
This one's, I think, from you, where you said, I was thinking I needed to fracture the figures' faces more, but at the same time, I didn't want to make them distorted because I think that's how people see black kids.
That's right.
So I tried to keep that beauty, that softness in their faces. That would seem to be the encounter that you have with each of them as you are building them. It seems like that is a conversation you are having the whole time. Is that right?
I cannot distort it too much. Like the 2 little boys in the prison, that's the most I will ever distort the face because I don't want anyone to think they're monsters or animals or anything like that. That's why the underneath face is the purest of the face. It is the most beautiful face that I can find, that one that is not touched by pop culture, not touched by any of the trappings of being here. And that's why a lot of the faces aren't from kids from Haiti, because they have lived through the violence and the tragedy, and they have the most beautiful smiles and love on their faces. And that is what I need to come through the work. And then what I do after that is I just start putting on other faces, but that main core faces always exist. And that's what I hope people find in the work. And that's what's in this face. This is a series that I'm working on called Subject America. I'm currently working on the last 3. And it's a critique in a way of America in the ways that we must critique a country that we love. And this guy, we're all citizens in this country and we all owe something to each other. And so I have this kid who is standing as a Boy Scout at attention. I put Obama's hand, this is Obama's hand in 2018 when he had calluses. Now he doesn't have anything. It's smooth as a baby's bottom. And so it's the promise and the oath that we take to take care of each other that exists, that should exist, not just black and white or brown or anything else. This is a contract that we have, a verbal contract, a humanity contract that we have with each other. And what happens when we don't do that? And the 5 works are critiquing that. So he has on a little hat on his head. What are those little green turtles, like those little turtle people? And so he's still young. And then I did his face as dark as possible, but I wanted one side to be light, because that's the hope. And then he's making the pledge, and he has the little Boy Scout, and then right now the America sign is upside down. And I just listened to Obama on Sunday when he said he said at first he thought it would take 12 years for us to get back together as people, as Americans, because we're so divided. And he said, I have to change that. It's going to be 20 years. And I just gasped. I couldn't believe it's going to take us 20 years to be able to understand and treat each other as all as Americans, not as Republicans, Democrats, or whatever, but just an American citizen. And that is
Bleak.
horrible. It is so horrible to me.
Yes.
So hopefully these works, we can start a dialogue, and maybe we can shave off a couple of those years.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
From your lips.
Oh, man.
I'd love to, this one I think of in connection to the work Fighting All the Isms, in terms of how you've elevated the figure on the canvas. Can you share a little bit about, why you have raised him up?
This work in particular is different from that series.
Okay.
This is, I don't know if you guys know the story of George Stanley Jr. He was a 12-year-old boy 14-year-old boy who was convicted of killing 2 little white girls in South Carolina in 1944. He was, his only crime was to say, I saw them that day. They arrested him. He was convicted in 3 days. He was put on an electric chair and killed within 80 days, 2 days prior to his 15th birthday. And one of the things when I saw his face, it was one of those things when you hear people say, I was haunted by that face. I never believe people when they say that, but it is true. I could not sleep for a whole week after seeing this and reading his story. I had to do something on this. He was so small they had to stack books in order to put the thing on his head so he could be electrocuted. He didn't do it. It was no way. He was very small. He hadn't had shoes for a year. So he couldn't have carried those girls across that way. And so I wanted to put him on some boots. I wanted to put on the string. I wanted to put on, he was executed in a man-sized, prison garb. It was way too big for him. And when he walked, he clanked, clank, 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 because he couldn't walk, and I just needed to lift him up. And so we flattened out the shirt, we put the stripes on, and we lifted him up because he just was never given the chance to grow up. And 80 Days is the name of this piece. And it's different from the ism because
You're right.
it's
Yeah,
different in a series in the sense that this is the only work in all my collages that I do a face that you can recognize. It was necessary.
Do you see yourself continuing in this vein where there are certain individuals whom you really want to continue to individualize it now?
No way.
Why?
This was just an extraordinary story. We all know about Emmett Till and what happened with Emmett Till. This story was, and he's one of many stories, but it just was, he wanted to be an artist, of course. It was just too painful for me not to do it. I thought more people needed to know. He was one of the youngest people ever to be executed in the United States. His story needed to be told. And I've been asked to do, a lot of young people who Tamir Rice and people who have been murdered by police. I just don't want to do that. I feel like one of the responsibilities as an artist, if you have some type of deep response to something, we have to push it forward. Now, this kid will hang in the National Portrait Gallery at the Smithsonian for the rest of eternity. So everybody will read that story. And I think that is, I think that's perfect for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Do you want to talk about this one?
I love to talk about that one. You can almost tell when the works that come out of my studio at the same time, because I got fixated on hats and children's hats. And all the stories of Karens, the Karen, and who don't know stories of Karen. And so I wanted to do some work that maybe had a bit of humor. Those are hard stories to watch. Some of them are funny because the people are idiots. But when people are sleeping in a dorm, in a common area, and you want to know their ID, they're sleeping, And so they act as if it's a notorious act. It's like a crime. And so I want to do a series of works called Notorious Acts at Leisure, at walking, at playing. Just make, come on, let people live their lives.
Yeah.
And so this was one of those works, and where I have Sidney Poitier's face, and the defiant one is there. And I put two mouths on there because he must be doing something illegal. And he's standing there with his hand open as if he had something in it, but he doesn't. So his notorious act is at leisure. Arrest him, please. Put him in jail for 200 years. So, yeah.
So I always like to tell people this when I am giving a tour of your exhibition, which is that this work, when we originally laid it out, it was included. And then when we were installing, I didn't think that we had any room. And I said, Deborah, everything looks great. We were Zooming, FaceTiming during the installation. Yeah. Everything looks great, but I wasn't able to put in this one work. And she said, well, you're going to have to find a space for it because it's really important. And of course, she was totally right. And I think
I was nice about it, though.
You were so nice. You were so nice.
Southerners were nice.
And I saw the error of my ways. But I think one of the things, as I then spent a lot of time with it, is it represents a kind of overarching concept. I mean, you spoke at the beginning about how there are 4 things that really drive your work. Black history, American history, art history, and popular culture. But there's something about this work that seems to really declare your belief in humanity, frankly. Right. It's a very empathic, it's a very kind of inclusive idea that is almost kind of concretized in the way that you collage, because you're bringing so many people together that are kind of embodied in a single figure. And to me, that is the manifestation of the we, that we are greater than they. That is certainly my interpretation, but I would love to hear why you were so rightly adamant that it be included.
Because it was so very important in that room in particular. I love text-based work. It is my heart. I tell people this all the time. It takes a lot of time because it's analytical. You have to spend the time with the text. And one thing that I really love is that we have to create new ways of telling our stories, to open up dialogue for further discussion. There are always new ideas coming. So who is the we and who is the they? And why is that greater than or less than the other? So the center is the key to this. And so in that room with the what if confessional, in that room with the other text-based work, we have to decide, and this is a challenge to the individual, who are we and who are they? And once you figure that out, you know whether or not you need work. You need to do some work on yourself because you are a person who is separating us from being equally important, So who is the we and who is the they?
And you're also, when one groups a they, it's excluding yourself.
Exactly.
And with a we, you are a part of something.
Right, something really big and beautiful.
Exactly. So I think this starts a few slides of some of the works. These aren't in the exhibition, but they relate to, they're part of the Pluralism series. Right. So do you want to share a little bit about how this series began and what prompted it?
Yeah, when I was at the Art Institute San Francisco Art Institute, text was coming out in my work, and people would tell me.
Could you just remind us what years this is?
This was in 2009, 8, 10, right before Syracuse, and text was coming out in the work, and it was coming out ugly and dirty like it always does, anything new. And people said, I really love that work. But why did you put them letters in there? Why did you do that? So once I got out of grad school, I started thinking about text and figuring out a way to talk about beauty in the way that my contemporaries wasn't talking about it. You talk with black artists, and we talk about black female artists. We talk about our bodies, our hair, how we are seen in the world. But what if we give a different language to how can I create a description of that without doing a visual image? But I wanted the viewer to form that visual image. So one of the things came up with black sounding names and how people automatically think of who that person is. And so I told all my friends, send me all the names, blah, blah, blah. So the day when I was typing them on the computer, and all the little red lines started coming under, the whole screen was just red lines. Webster was saying, these are not right. These are no good, and they're all misspelled. They don't exist. This cannot be real. And these were really human people. And so I said, that's the work.
Yeah.
That was the first segue into doing these text-based work, and it's called sovereignty, because black culture is a product of an American culture. It is a subculture. We exist simply because we were brought over here, and we had to exist. So these names, as I tell people, it is the first act of freedom that freed, I don't like to use the term slaves, freed enslaved individuals were able to do. They could name their children. We kept last names, but we were able to do first names. And over time, that migrated and changed, and it became really popular, and people became really creative in naming children. And so, but it led to this total individuality of that. I think that's such a powerful name to be called Sharkesia. I mean, you're Shark. It's nothing you can't do. Nothing. Yeah. It's a powerful being. And I love that idea. And so text just bloomed from there.
It's such a powerful room. I think it's a smaller room. It's more intimate. You can get right up close. And to me, it kind of, it works on you, or let me phrase it differently. It raises the same questions around identity and what we project onto people who we don't know based on these small signifiers, right? And it could be what you wear, it could be your name. And so, you know, the collages, they're so visually seductive. They kind of, you might not catch it at first, what you are doing.
And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and with the text-based works, it's a little bit more. You have to work a little bit.
You have to do a little work.
Exactly, and I think that's why I think they're so strong, because the experience of going through and of questioning and of understanding, what does it mean when your name is not recognized by a system that is so ubiquitous in this world that people use every day, Microsoft Word, something like that, or Google, or whatever it is, that you're not recognized, you are not counted, you are not acknowledged, you are not valued.
Right.
That it's so subtle, and yet it's so big.
It's
and
debilitating.
I think completely. And what does that do to you every time?
Right.
There is a work that's in the exhibition, and the list of names is very, very faint, but the red underline underneath each one that's not recognized is quite bright. And to me, it is one of the loudest works, even though it's small. It's one of the loudest works that you've made, because you've taken a system that we're all as viewers are quite familiar with, and you've shown us its bias. You've shown us its flaws.
It's flawed, yeah. And in a very unique way that hurts a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But it's changing. We had a mayor named Keisha Lance Bottoms. I love that, a mayor named Keisha.
So we have a couple of installation views. I want to I think before we get to questions from the audience, there are two works that I wanted to
Okay.
ask you about. One is this one, I See You, and these are nine examples or components of an even larger series that you've made. And I believe you made this at the Rauschenberg residency that you were a part of couple of years ago. So could you maybe just tell us about how this came to be?
Right, so I don't get to set screen as much as I like. One of the things about going to the Rauschenberg residency is that you can do whatever you like. And so one morning I got up after doing a bunch of collages that I was going to get up and create a face. I created a face, burned it, did the whole thing, idea of the screen. But one of the things I learned in high school was that you needed something to warm up with. So I decided to get a tablet and tear off all the pages, I think it's 20, and just do these faces without any rest, just screen, let go, screen, let go. And these faces started coming out. And when the paint started to get really, faint where you couldn't even see it, I screen, washed off, put it in green, and then once it all dried, I put them all together and just went right back on top of them. I was slowly taking away her identity, who she was. It wasn't a clear idea. This was a little boy's bottom and a little girl's face, and I said, I see you. And the more I worked on them, I'm animated. Did you see me doing it?
I love it.
Okay, okay.
We're in person. We can do whatever we want. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So anyway, when I was doing the silk screens, they just started to appear in a way that I really loved. It started to become muddy, and it became, even though it was muddy, it was clear. Even though it was green, it was necessary. All the things that we needed to see were starting to come out in that work. And I'm going to do more of that. I need to do more of that. And so these works kind of opened the door for that. Then what happened? I leave Rauschenberg, I get back in the world, and they, collage. And so I haven't been able to do collage. But I'm going to do more of this.
It seems like it was a really generative process, that it just spawned so many new things.
It's physical. It's labor. I love that.
Okay, and then the last one that I did want to talk about, What If?
Okay.
Which is this sculptural installation on the right. And this is an installation that includes some of those text-based works from your pluralism series. And What If is a interactive, experiential installation that I believe is the first that you've ever, of this type, that you've really ever done. So to me, and I think to you as well, as I understand it, it is a very close corollary with the pluralism series in terms of, as well as the collages, frankly, in terms of creating an awareness and a kind of way of returning to the present those who have disappeared, to honor, to dignify, and to remember, because for those who might not know, lining the walls of this confessional sculpture are the names of those 400 women who have disappeared. And so much as you did kind of with those black on black paintings where you brought them to life, with this installation, the viewer, you kind of instantiate them yourself. You are forced to bring them back to life.
Right. Even the materials I use, if you think of the Vietnam Memorial, where all the names of the fallen soldiers, and they're etched in there, they're etched into that, and it's very beautiful and it's warm. But when you think of texture and you think of black women and our hair and our bodies, to be enclosed in a little box, not knowing, and you could, well, don't go in there and touch them, but you could touch the felt, and, well, don't touch. But you can see the felt. The felt reminds me of hair, and the idea of being, in that box and living with those images with a big life-size mirror in front of you, and audio talking about these women as they perceived, who gets noticed and who doesn't get noticed, who gets found and who is allowed to drown. And those types of things happen in that confessional. I wanted it to be a confessional because I'm not Catholic, but I know when you go into confession and to profess your sins to a priest, it is a very private moment between you and the priest and God. And you pull the curtain, and no one can experience what that is about but you and that person. And my confessional is just you and yourself. You have to face yourself in that. It's titled after Claudia Rankine's Just Us book, where she has a whole chapter where she says, what if? And she goes on this whole language about what if this happened, what if that, and it's so beautifully written. I hope you guys get that book. And when I read that, I knew that had to be the title of this. What if? What if I spoke up? What if I wasn't quiet? What if I just sit there? She's asking you to challenge yourself. Sometimes when you tell people who they are, you take the air out of the room. It changes the atmosphere. The enclosure helps you to examine yourself in that room without anyone watching. I think mirrors are very telling. And that's why it was so important to put them.
Too telling.
Too telling, I know. I know. And I thought it was very important to have that close encounter. I thought it was important to have those bars across and the light hit a certain way. So when you're in there, and I know people have taken pictures, you now see the prison in which we live in on a daily basis. You get to experience that. But the great thing about it, you get to walk out of it and we're still there.
Well, that is, it is one of the most, I think, poignant and profound and kind of forces self-reflection of your works. I mean, obviously, when you put yourself physically in a different space and you are conditioned by the light and the mirror and stuff, you can't avoid those things. And I think that's the empathy, that's the kind of relating back to the we is greater than they. It is a kind of instantiation of that. And I think that is a very good place for us to pause and to open this conversation up to questions from the audience.
The first comes from Anonymous, and they ask, do you remember your first moment with creating art and the affirmation to continue on with your practice?
Well, when I wasn't an artist, I was just a person who marked on my mother's wall, and I got spanking for it. I think when I knew that art was a commodity was when I was in the third grade, and I was able to draw a lot of things for other kids, and I would trade it for pencils and notebook paper and all sorts of things. And my desk was full of all of this stuff that I could draw dolls, I could draw whatever, and that was when I first know, hey, I can do this.
All right, we've got another question from Anonymous. If you put your names on, I'll read them out as I read your questions. And this person asks, where do you source imagery for the children's faces in your work?
We talked about the copycat, so I will tell you this, because I've had to kind of roll back a lot of things I talk about, but I will tell you, I get some of the faces from Haiti. I get some of the faces from different countries in Africa, because it is a continent, it is not one thing. I also get children's faces from America. And I combine them all to create my collages.
Someone asks, what was your research process when collecting the 400 names of the missing Black girls and women?
So we're art studio. So my prompt to my studio assistant was to go out and find the names. We did not go into detail and find out what happened to each woman. We just wanted to know these were people who were declared missing. And we did not, only sometimes we knew they were found, or sometimes they were runaways. But the idea was not to take on All my girls had MFAs, and not to take on a research project because this wasn't that. We wanted to gather the names up for the exhibition. And the whole thing was, when you look at the names of these girls, they're all the names, the Black sounding name. It was very few Kimberlys. It was very few, Marshalls and things like that. They were all names like that's in the confessional. It was very weird. So, I don't know. It's crazy.
Margaret asks, when in your artistic journey did you feel that you found your voice?
Did I have to do what?
When in your artistic journey did you feel that you found your voice?
I still haven't found my true voice. I'm still looking for it. But I think, Nora, I just told Nora this little story. I'll tell the world now. When I was in London, this is the moment, I guess, just recently, when The Guardian wrote a review of my booth, and they said, Deborah Roberts, this is the work, this is the modern art we have come to see. That's when I thought I found my voice. And I was like, oh my God, they said. And I was so happy because I know I've been telling this stuff. I come from a family of preachers, so I don't want to preach to people. I'm trying to put out, this is what's happening. I don't know why you can't see it, type thing. And so, sometimes it's getting through, sometimes you don't. You think sometimes people love it because of the colors. You think sometimes people love it because of the fact they're kids. Sometimes you think people love it because everybody else loves it. Sometimes you think people just love art and they get it. You don't always know when people really see what you're trying to say. And in that moment, I felt like someone did see that. And he had the courage to say it in print. So, yeah.
This one's specific. Doug wants to know, did you find that your artistic practice thrived or languished during the pandemic?
It did not languish. That did not happen for me. One of the things is, for me as an artist, my safe place is in my art. It's always been since I was a child. So when I was horribly upset about what was happening, I was mainly afraid for my mother and myself too, if I'm honest. I went weeks and weeks and weeks without going to the studio. I tried to do work at home, but the home that I created was simply not meant to do art in, because my whole life was where I did my art. So when I got my home, I made it perfectly, round, really round tables, diamonds, and all sorts of things where you couldn't put art down. And but I was so anxious, and so I started getting up at 5:30 because we were all sheltering in place, and I would Zoom to my studio and work. And after 3 days of doing that, everything calmed down, and all the work that I produced was based on work I wanted to do, and that needed to come out at that time. It wasn't had anything to do with COVID. And then I calmed down.
Well, this relates to that a little. Anonymous wants to know, do you always have a clear idea before starting? And does the meaning of the work ever show itself while in process or after it's done?
Oh yeah, it definitely shows itself in progress. It definitely does that. Sometimes I'm thinking I'm doing something else, and the work changes. And sometimes I have big ideas for work, and it fails horribly. And what do I do when that happens? I just said, oh, that's too bad. That didn't work out.
No way.
I do.
Really?
I do.
Do you
Because
scrap it, or do you try and?
I don't throw work away anymore. I used to throw it away. the Texas Longhorns lose the football game, I would abuse it. I don't do that anymore. I think maturity has got me to the point where I know that I can do better. And sometimes things just don't work out, and it's okay if they don't.
Yeah.
I don't like not trying, and failure is a part of trying. And so, you know, I beat up myself, of course, like everybody else. But if something don't, because I work on multiple works at a time, you know, there are things in that space that are working. So I just say, oh, you know, that one didn't look good, and it's okay. You know, this is the point. This is a time when everybody wants to work. You say, well, somebody's going to get that one anyway. And so you just go and concentrate on the ones that are really, you know. I mean, anyone who says all their works are fantastic, it, to me, is a liar. They're not. I have flops. I have, you know, bloopers. You know, I mean, it happens. I can show you some if you want to see them. I mean, they're up in
Good
those
to know
pictures.
you're human.
Yeah.
Maybe on your phone after the show. All right, we have a lot of great questions that are coming in. I wish that we had time for all of them tonight. Alas, we do not. So let's end on an up note after talking about what didn't work. Why don't you share what is your absolute favorite piece that you have ever made, if you have one?
Oh, no. I have favorite pieces of the moment. I have been to a place where I thought I could not get better than this, and I've gotten better than that. And that's why I would never say I have a masterpiece, because a masterpiece is the end. I love that Becoming work. I should have kept it. I cannot live with the George Staney works. I cannot live with them in my home. So I think out of the series of works that we put up, the notorious act of leisure is one of my favorite ones, because it's just funny as hell to me. And it talks about Karen so much, and I just love it. So.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Nora and Deborah. And thank you all for being here tonight. Wonderful evening.